Nvidia and AMD have struck an unprecedented deal with the U.S. government. The two chip makers will give Washington 15% of their China AI chip sales in exchange for a license to export high-powered products into China. Experts say the move marks a first in U.S. tech trade policy. Bernstein analyst Stacey Rasgon wrote in a note on August 11th, "We aren't sure we like the precedent this sets. Will it stop with Chinese AI? Will it stop with controlled products? Will other companies be required to pay to sell into the region? It feels like a slippery slope to us." And Stacey joins us now to break it down. Stacey, thanks for being here.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
So why do you look at this as a slippery slope, and what scenarios are you most concerned about?
Sure. So this is kind of unprecedented. We haven't seen anything like this before. At least I have not seen anything like this before. I mean, the positive is, without these licenses, Nvidia and AMD can't sell these parts into China. And so look, I'll take it. 85% is better than 0%. Now, that being said, the way that this is structured, it almost feels to me like a bit of a pay for play. It seems like those licenses are conditional on making these payments, which is very unusual. And again, it does feel to me like a slippery slope. It seems isolated right now to specific China AI parts from these two companies. Why does it have to stop there? I mean, if you take this to its potential conclusion, ultimately, like, why wouldn't any company potentially have to make extra payments to the administration to do anything they wanted to do? I mean, you could follow the logic chain all the way to something like that. It's not, and I'm not saying we'll go there, but I don't like how this begins. This is not something that we ought to be doing. These companies already pay, to the government to do their business. It's called taxes. They pay that already. They pay income taxes. I don't see why we should have to pay extra. The other thing, my other concern is I don't see any strategic benefits or rationale to this besides, frankly, as a cash grab. Like, how does it help strategically these guys sell into China? I mean, it brings a little bit of money into the coffers. I mean, fine, but it doesn't solve anything around national security. In fact, you could argue that if you're concerned about these sales from a national security standpoint, I mean, this almost feels like selling access, right? It just I don't like it. It smells bad to me. I don't like how this potentially develops.
Nvidia lost billions when U.S. export controls blocked H20 chip sales to China. How much revenue are they sort of recouping by striking this deal?
Yeah, well, I mean, so what they had suggested is it would cost about $8 billion in the current quarter, and it probably cost them, I don't know for the full. They shipped a little bit in the beginning of the year, but it probably cost them 15 billion plus, like maybe more, in lost sales. AMD had suggested that it would have cost them $1.5 billion for the full year. I think it was roughly 700 million in the quarter they just reported, and then another 800 million for the second half. So you figure on an annual run rate basis, Nvidia's probably got over $20 billion in demand that they could sell, and AMD a few billion. 15% of those, you figure Nvidia's probably shipping a few $1 billion off to the government if they recover all of those sales, and AMD would probably be a few $100 billion, that 15% cut, if they recover all those sales. You have to remember, though, you don't turn these supply chains on and off like a light switch, right? They had already stopped production. They actually don't have any finished goods on the shelf that they can pick up and ship. They have to restart these supply chains and restart production. It will take some time. It is, I mean, for Nvidia, at least for this current quarter, there's not going to be any, right? Maybe they get a little bit like next quarter. It's probably not until like even into the end of the year, maybe even to the beginning of next year, that those supply chains would be fully ramped up again. It's going to take some time.
Could this prompt other countries to adopt their own revenue cut requirements for U.S. tech companies seeking market access?
I mean, who knows, right? Like I said, we're sort of in uncharted waters here, just in general on trade policy, and I don't know what will happen, but there's lots of. There are lots of things going on that are unprecedented, and you could imagine many possible scenarios, both from the U.S. as well as from other countries, about things that they could do.
And how could this deal sort of change the power balance, putting governments, not markets, in the driver's seat for high-end tech trade?
Well, I mean, again, it is a little unprecedented for that reason. We're seeing some other things, like there's news stories suggesting that China is kind of cracking down and asking some of their companies in their country not to buy these chips, And they're making other arguments. They're arguing, they're worried about backdoors and things, which by the way, Nvidia has said there's no backdoors in these chips. But there are other mechanisms that other countries are now starting to use to get more involved versus what we saw. And it's not that surprising. I mean, AI in general clearly is a huge is an enormous strategic imperative at the sovereign level. So maybe it's not that surprising that governments are getting involved to some degree. Like I get that. Again, just extracting dollars off the top is a new one for me. Like I said, it doesn't really go after any of the more strategic reasons that governments might want to get involved in this trade. But I mean, clearly, just given the nature of what is being sold here, the sovereign interests are going to get more and more involved.
Do you think this will affect the US-China race to lead in AI, if at all?
I mean, it already is, right? I mean, just even without the stuff, the Nvidia has already been haircut a number of times in terms of what they were allowed to sell into China. There was already a growth of like local Chinese alternatives. You have to remember, like when the original bans were put on 2022 under the Biden administration, Nvidia was haircut in terms of what they could sell. They worked around those limits. Those were haircut further a year later, and that resulted in this H20 part that's the subject of all of the discussion. There are local alternatives in China that actually have better performance than the H20 because Nvidia has one arm tied behind their two arms tied behind their back. They can't sell. What the H20 actually brings to the local Chinese developers is the advantage of the Nvidia ecosystem. They've built their AI infrastructure around Nvidia, and so being able to still continue to use that software base and that ecosystem is very, very valuable. I actually think it's important for Nvidia and maybe even AMD to be able to sell into China because if they can't, what do? You're basically handing the Chinese AI market over to Huawei, which is the biggest local alternative, and you're encouraging local developers to coalesce around Huawei's ecosystem and build that up to critical mass. And if that becomes critical mass, then what happens? And why does it stay in China? Like you may start to diffuse outward and become a much more capable global competitor to what we have. So, but this may be another reason if these rumors are right that China's government is now asking like Chinese customers not to use these parts. That may be a rationale. China probably wants to grow their own ecosystem to something that is more relevant on a global basis. And so I think we're already like at odds, right? And to the extent that we are putting constraints on China's ability to buy this stuff, they are going to be doubling and tripling down on local support, local manufacturing, and self-sufficiency. By the way, not just in AI, like we're seeing it in other areas of semiconductors, we're seeing it in semiconductor manufacturing equipment, and they're behind. They're what they can deliver in general in broad use is not as good as what you can get, like outside of China. You wouldn't probably want to go down some of the paths that they're going down if you didn't have to, but they have no choice. Of course, they're going to go down those paths, and in some sense, you could argue we're forcing China to be creative in all senses of that word. Like they're not stupid. Like they're very, very good engineers. Engineers tend to do their best work under constraints. It's going to be very interesting to see what this whole thing looks like in like 10 years. And by the way, I don't know what the right answer is, like, because I understand the national security rationale to want to limit their ability to purchase the stuff. So I get that. I don't know what the right answer is, but the interplay is going to be very interesting to watch.
Thanks so much, Stacy.
You bet. My pleasure.